Hello. So today I'm going to be talking about interviewing, which is really just the tip of a very large iceberg, which we're talking about the whole iceberg, I guess. This talk is not just for you if you're looking for a job, but if you interview people. I'm Ryan LaBouve. I currently work for Envoy, where we challenge the status quo of workplace technology. It's a Bay Area company, super fun. Most of the time I'm doing Ember and Node stuff, but since it's a startup, I do a little bit of everything. This talk kind of started at a certain point in my career. I started interviewing more and more people as we're trying to hire, and I would see people make the same, like, I don't want to say mistakes, but it's like I had to look and I found really interesting things about people, but they just weren't coming across in the interview. So like I would have to do a lot of like poking in their GitHub, looking on their social media, and asking them a lot of questions to actually get kind of the best to shine through. And I was like, I wish I could give a talk that kind of just like put it all on the table from like my perspective and helped people get a job. So given that we have 45 minutes, I'm going to kind of lay out some goals. I want to give you more or less a map to getting the job you want. This is not like just your first job, but this is like a career trajectory that you should be able to keep coming back to. So I don't care if you're a junior dev or if you're like, you have a really good job and you're looking for something else, or if you have a job and you're trying to help get people to come work for you. I think there's something for everybody. The hard thing here is there's like thousands of pieces of advice I could say about this, and like it's trying to distill and present it in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to start with a story. This may seem a little bit unrelated to what we're talking about, but I promise it's not. There's this really indie kind of anime short film called The Reward on Vimeo, and it starts off with these like two super ordinary dudes sitting in a village, and this like completely crazy hero rolls through the town. They're both like, man, I want to be like this person. And on the way out of town, the hero drops this map with an X on it. And like they fight over the map and they end up like, let's go on the journey together. And they start off in like some really basic places, and they like find these magic weapons. They start taking on new challenges, a lot of time unsuccessfully, a lot of time having to like bail their crazy friends who are like doing it with them over and over again. But like eventually your friend that you're on the journey with like kind of helps you back, and you start like having some wins and taking on bigger risks. And like before you know it, you're like riding on an ocean of lava on a fleet of narwhals, having completed some epic quest. And like what we see as the journey progresses is like in each frame these people kind of like change, and like they don't see this, but we see them becoming the heroes that they originally saw riding through their village. And like they just keep fighting like crazy bosses and blindly charging towards this X. And when they get there, there's nothing there. It's just literally a big X on the ground, which is all the map advertised, really. But there's this big mirror, and they kind of realize along the way, it was like the journey has made them into these heroes, and that was like the reward, right? And then like it ends with them riding through the same town with like some dopey looking kids looking at them, and like to these kids, they're like the heroes now, and these kids are like, how do I become like you? And you see one of them slowly like slip the map out of the satchel with the X on it that started the whole journey for them, and the kids like repeat the same thing over again. This is exactly like my journey of programming. It's like it's a little bit ridiculous for like the premise of this talk, but we'll see. You'll see if you don't already see. So kind of like revisiting the goals for today, given this map we have with the big X, I want to help you see like where you are and like help debunk some of the myths of the journey to help you get the job. And this is all leading up to the Fearless interview. And some anti-goals, I'm not going to teach you computer science in 30 minutes. It's not possible. And I'm also not going to help you fake your way into a job. So anyways, let's get started. The quest map. I kind of broke it down into six parts. 1 is learning how to code. 2 is getting your first tech job. 3 is preparing to look for a new job. 4 is the job hunt. 5, what we're leading up to, is the fearless interview. And 6 is kind of a postscript of being at the X. And throughout this talk, I've talked with literally all of my friends who code and had them just give advice that they found helpful along the way. So it's you'll see quotes from a lot of randos that I really respect. So learning how to code. This is your magic weapons that you find. It's interesting. I was talking with John Moses and one of my friends, and he's actually giving a talk about this in a few weeks. So I'm not going to try to go over it all. He's got a great series on it, and he's going to speak more about it in about a week or 2 or 3. I don't know. But my TLDR is learn a language, build internet things, meet developers, share what you build. I personally learned how to code on this book called the Ruby on Rails tutorial, where we built Twitter from scratch. freeCodeCamp is great. There's another one by Colt Steele I highly recommend. You build Yelp from scratch. That's not the point, though. It's just it's a lot less important where you start as long as you pick something and finish it. That's kind of my point for learning how to code. After your boot camp experience, this is where the real work begins. You need to build something on your own. If you don't know what to build, I recommend starting with a blog, because it's really easy to, you know what a blog is, and you can build a very small or a very complex one. You can ship it, people can read it, you have users, you have something to talk about. Like my friend Jordan Smith says, be honest, keep learning, and talk about what you learn. So after you build something cool, this is where you start signing up for lightning talks. freeCodeCamp, OKCJS, the Ruby group. Wherever you can talk, you need to share what you learn. Just keep building things, get as far as you can on projects, make them dumb, make them fun, make them something you use. There's this guy, Ira Glass. He has this little short story called The Gap. It's about creatives, about how when you start in a new field, you're like, I want to be a painter. And it's I see these amazing paintings, and then you paint this just terrible thing. It's how do I get from here to here? And everybody goes through this. It's exactly the same with programming. And his answer is do a lot of work, a huge volume of work, and that volume of work is what helps you close the gap. And eventually, the quality of your work will catch your ambitions. So if you're still stuck on this, Wes Bos has this thing called JavaScript 30. You build 30 small things in JavaScript over 30 days. You'll probably make it to day 13 and be building something really interesting that you like. And you'll just go off on this tangent. That's what you want. That's great. That's a sign that you're doing the right thing. So the boss battle for learning how to code. Can you use Git and GitHub? Do you have a side project that you can point to that's I built this thing and it's on the internet now? I can prototype stuff in HTML and CSS. I can solve basic coding challenges with JavaScript. And also, I understand the basic workings of an API. This is a pretty good start, which segues into getting your first tech job. So especially if you go through freeCodeCamp, you've built some stuff on your own, you want to get paid. You want to start working in tech. And so before your first tech job, I personally felt like everything I did was just a string of terrible failures with programming. And then somehow, as soon as you learn your first tech job, this is where you feel like you're on the fleet of narwhals cruising through the lava sea. It's just I don't know, it's really big. It feels a lot like getting your big break. But a question I get a lot is, how do I know I'm ready for my first job in the industry? So this is where I have to remind you, everybody started somewhere. Everybody was a junior. Nobody came out just programming. So my rule of thumb is if you can build something useful, you're probably hireable to somebody. You don't have to know everything. You just have to be able to add value to the team that you're joining. That's a really important thing. Be very open about your current skill level. You don't have to hide or lie about anything, but also don't undersell yourself. Especially if you come from a job that has a customer service background. A lot of programmers after 10 years turn into sea creatures, and they can't talk to people. So you bring very valuable skills to the table just by being able to engage with your customers. It's these are very valuable things that you bring to the team. So I really like Queen Carmen says it's okay to say you don't know something, much better than making something up. Specific warnings for your first job in tech. You want to make sure the team you're joining is ready to bring on juniors. Some questions I suggest asking. 1, do you have other juniors on your team? 2, are there people on staff who were a junior but now are no longer juniors that are still with you? 3, what kind of mentorship do you have for juniors? How do you make sure that they continue to progress? And 4, are there clear job bands? How and how often would we reevaluate whether I'm still a junior? And I'll say personally at Envoy, this is something we always come back to, and it's like, I think it's hard for companies to get this right. And so it's like, don't feel bad if you're at a company. It's like, we're trying to do the mentorship program. The important part is just to keep asking yourself these questions and trying to make sure the answer continues to improve. John Mosesman says, get a friend that can get you a job. Honestly, this is probably the hardest step in the whole process. So harder than like building that compiler or doing weird video game stuff is getting your first job. That's like pretty deep for somebody who's been in the industry probably at least 10 years. So boss battle, first tech job. From this job, you're gonna want things on your resume. You're gonna wanna launch something, monitor actual software, maintain it, deal with customers. These are all skills that you won't get from anywhere else. Specifically, you wanna make sure you're continuing to gain more experience collaborating with other programmers. This is something that's very unique to actually having a programming job. And at the end of this, you really wanna make sure that you no longer consider yourself a junior. So that leads me to my next point, is preparing to look for a new job. There's a lot of overlap between the first job, but this is where I find is actually, on my personal journey, was like the hardest point, because I worked for a company for maybe 6 years, and like at some point I felt really stuck. And it took me a long time to figure out how to continue to ramp up my skills to get ready for the next stage in my career. And again, going back to our metaphor, like this is where you're kind of like, I'm kind of a grizzled veteran already. I probably don't see this. If you've been working in a job for 1 to 2 years, you've changed. You were shipping software, whereas before you were not. This is like massive changes in you. So I break this down into 3 parts, and I'll go over them. 1 is to prove your T, which we'll talk about because that sounds really weird, /r/no context. 2 is get the junior out of your title. And 3 is improve your coding chops. So there's this idea of T-shaped people. Somebody came up with it. I don't know who they are. But if you think about the letter T, it's got like a horizontal long top with a long vertical stem. And essentially what you're wanting to say is, I have been exposed to a lot of things in programming, but I'm really good at this one thing. And this is where, like T-shaped people, I will hire these people all day, every day. And so this is where you want to say, like, yeah, I've made a couple APIs, I've done like some DevOps-y things, and I've built some front ends, but I really love Ember.js, and that's where I spend most of my time contributing. And so really, this is like going from a junior to just a software engineer. This is probably the hardest thing. Figure out what you're interested in, and then work on developing the stem of your T. So let's say you're really into X. How do you prove that? Some things that I recommend is like open source. You'll probably be using tools that revolve around X. So like if you like D3, go sign up for the D3 repo. Look at other libraries built on D3. Start trying to contribute back to these things. Write an article comparing D3 to 3JS. I don't think that's actually a good comparison. But anyways, complete like one serious side project that lets that shine. Blog about this. How do you do a non-trivial D3 project from scratch? Even if you feel like it's repetitive and people have done it, it's still important for you to do it. And just for example, when I was like, I'm really into Ember.js, I was like, how do I actually prove that to people? And then I went and looked. This is open source I've done and launched projects on my own. Here's projects that I've contributed to, actual full side projects, articles, talks. It's just like, if this was a court case, it would be really easy to prove that I really like Ember.js. It's a very specific thing, but when somebody's like, I need somebody to do Ember.js, and I'm like, here's my resume, they're like, I want you to help me. So like, that's really where you want to get. Getting junior out of your title. What's the easiest way to get junior out of your title? Stop calling yourself a junior. That seems like really dumb advice, but like after you get your first job, drop it. You're not a junior anymore. You're always just a software engineer. Every organization is going to have different standards from junior to senior, so don't try to sell yourself as something. Just like explain, like, I'm an engineer, here's what I love. Some things you can do to really help you with this also is have a regular practice of learning from people and resources that are better than you, and practice the things you learn, and then focus on one thing at a time. I'm just going to throw a couple things that I've historically found really helpful. I'll publish these slides and you can refer to them later. If you're new to computer science and have a non-traditional background, the Base CS podcast is amazing. It breaks down usually like pomp and academic things like data structures and B trees and traversal of recursive blah, blah, blah. It's like breaks it down into ways that's really easy to understand. You don't know JS, it's like a great like, I do JavaScript every day and I want to know more about this. Eric Elliott writes on Medium a lot, his stuff's great. There's this book called Pooter, which is Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby. It's like, there's a lot of great like architecture books you can start reading and start like improving like different domains of your programming skills. Ruby Tapas, Fun Function is a great JavaScript one. There's more. This guy's super grumpy, but his screencasts are great. Upcase is another one that's like really good. This is where I stole the like get the junior out of your title. It's literally like you watch really good programmers pair on hard problems, and you end up learning an amazing amount by doing this. And when you're comfortable enough, which should be now, read the open source repos you use. It's my one Cyrus reference, I promise. So open source projects are literally like playbooks about how to make the things you like. So you can just like read how to do it, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can make D3 now. I don't know why I chose D3. I never used D3. And learn how to use a debugger. That's a hard one, but it's useful. And also learn how to do TDD, same. And then other thing is like when you're ready to actually start applying for jobs, you need to make sure that your coding chops are like up to snuff, which is like more of a matter of discipline. Do an hour of HackerRank every day. Read the Cracking the Code interview book. This book is amazing. Like nobody remembers all this stuff, but if I had to look for a new job, I would get a 6-pack of Red Bull and read this over one weekend, and like that's where I would start. Imposter's Handbook is another great one, and then Interview Cake. Again, I'll post all these later. So like if you're looking for specific resources, reach out to me. I'll help you match like what I think would make the most sense for where you're at. Okay, so preparing to look for a job. You can prove to me you're interested in one or two very specific technical things. This is a very important thing. You have a consistent practice of learning from high quality sources like hour a day, 2 hours on the weekend, whatever it is, like continue to learn things. You can also easily solve a wide variety of programming challenges. Okay, now we're on to the job hunt. This is all about networking, positioning, and negotiation. I really just wanted to put this in my slides. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about. So, networking. Heroic Eric says, go to meetup and conferences. This is where I've gotten most of my jobs from. Alex, an engineer I work with, says, meet actual engineers where you're applying. Message me and buy me coffee. I will tell you exactly what things are like. This is great advice. Like, I actually knew somebody who the way that they would start applying for a job is they would find an open source repo for a company they wanted to apply for, start opening issues and pull requests against it, and use that to like apply. Like, what open source have you done? Well, have you seen your projects? You didn't update this, and I did. Like, it's an okay way to do that. This is also extremely opinionated, but in my opinion, the best jobs come from direct recommendations, then applying for companies you like, and then literally everything else. And I'm not gonna like poo-poo on recruiters or job boards or anything. They're all great. But if you have a friend who will say, I like working at my job, that's huge. Like, that's somebody you want to work with. That is like the easiest way to know you're getting into a situation that you'll like. So again, make connections, contribute to open source, go to meetups, go to conferences, speak at meetups and conferences if you can, apply for contracting positions at companies. This is easy because if you do a bad job, they don't have to pay you after a week. Like, be like, hey, I would love to do some consulting for you, contracting for you. And then Twitter like a madman or a mad person. The last time I tweeted that I was out of a job, I had 3 job offers from Twitter just because I tweet about programming stuff. This is like an amazing thing. So positioning, what kind of company do you want to work for? What matters to you? Do you want to be remote? Does salary matter? Does the tech stack matter? Does your team matter? This kind of needs to inform what type of jobs you start to look for. Startups, big companies, consultancies, going out on your own. Do you want to work for like OU or a government thing? When you kind of have this, like if you want to work at MacroCorp, like update your LinkedIn. Don't have weird stuff on social media. Buy some nice business casual clothes. Do whatever these people do. Like be like them. This is the job you want. This is the lifestyle you want. Like figure out how these people work and just like emulate them in a way that's not like I'm forgetting who I am, but like these are the people you want to fit in with. So like start fitting in with them now. If you want to work at Startuply, like buy a MacBook and a hoodie. Like, but you say like start taking pictures of your latte and post them on Instagram. These will help you fit in and kind of understand how these people think and work. Again, know how to fit in, know how to be yourself, know how to stand out. So when you're applying, when you're like working on companies, you're like, I want to apply at Startuply or MacroCorp. Like you need to kind of do some research on these companies. What are their core values, their mission statement? What is their financial health? Key personnel. Google the company and figure out what they say on their social media. Figure out who their competitors are. And when you start interviewing, like I know people know that they're interviewing with me at least a week ahead of time. So like it's really easy to figure out what I'm into. So if you start like, if you open up with a like React versus Ember joke, I'll probably be like, oh, this guy's funny. He knows that he's trolling me. Like that's great. Then for every company you interview to, you need to add them to like, I have this like spreadsheet. There's actually a better way to explain this. It needs to look like this. Like when you're interviewing, you just have like, you're connecting all of these dots and like looking at all of your opportunities. So negotiation, it's super hard. But your salary negotiation, which routinely takes less than 5 minutes to conclude, has an outsized influence on what your compensation is. The difference in $5,000 or $10,000 to a company is chump change. It's nothing. It's an HR gimmick. So like, you need to do a little bit of research about what companies are offering because they game the system to give you as little as possible. Not everybody, but like you need to look out for yourself. Also, like apply for a wide variety of positions. Specifically, if this is one of your first jobs, the only successful way to leverage your salary up higher that I've seen is to use offers from other companies. It is not playing, like you're not playing anybody, like the companies are playing against each other. This guy right here, he was a professional poker player who turned into a like software engineer, and he basically started getting like $80,000 offers, and this whole blog post is how eventually he ended up getting a $250,000 offer from like companies playing against each other, which I'm not saying like that's the rule. I wish I had that kind of offer, I don't. But like, it's interesting, you should definitely go do a little bit of research here. And again, it should feel like this. If it doesn't feel like this, you're not hunting for jobs, right? Let's see, I actually don't care about that right now. This is actually a really good story, but Stephanie Holbert kind of talks about her whole like career trajectory. So go read this later, but I'm kind of wanting to run out of time. So again, the job hunt, this is all like super basic stuff. Have a resume, post on social media, you're looking for a job. Portfolio, side projects, and personal side are up to date and operational. Nothing's weird on your social media. Network constantly and apply everywhere. And so 34 minutes, and we're finally to the fearless interview. And it's going to be a lot like the X in the story. You may be very surprised at how little is here. Why? Because your whole journey in your software development career is what allows you to have fearless interviews. It's the side projects, it's the open source, it's the networking. That's what prepares you to fight the boss battle. If you're level 1 and you're trying to go against this like deity dude, there's nothing you can do to prepare. You just have to go kill pigs in the woods until you level up. Like, but that being said, I will talk a little bit about the logistics of an interview because I think it helps a lot. There's usually 3 parts: intros, some type of challenge, and then questions at the end. So this is maybe my favorite piece of advice that any of my programmer friends gave me. Be prepared to answer or volunteer what is the one thing you built that you're most proud of. David said, if people can answer this well, that's the leading indicator if he'll hire them or not, and it's never let him down. Specifically, he looks for, do you care about what you're building? Do you understand what you're building? Is it something that I personally can connect with? Also on intros, my little piece of logistical advice, if you're signing up for if you're trying to interview at a company, sign up for their service. Have a critical opinion about what they do. Understanding a little bit of business context can really drive the conversation when you're interviewing. So if it's like an error tracking software, sign up for them and then their competitor. Like one of the biggest things I've ever got dinged on with an interview is I applied at a place, I didn't sign up for it, and I didn't really know what they do. And like the first thing was like, tell me about why you wanted to interview with us. Specifically, what did you think about our product? And it's like, you basically can't walk your way out or around that. So like if you do this, it's one of the like most insightful pieces that you can do to help prepare. The challenge. This is like people's most stressed out. Like if you read the title, probably what you thought I was going to talk about is like 300 tips to defeat the programming challenge. And the thing is, like, there are some, it's like, read this book and do this. Like, and that's honestly what it is. There's no tricks. It's like hard work, and then you just have to be ready. I will tell you, the challenges typically come in 3 flavors. There's usually like especially if you're doing front-end stuff, like React or Ember or Vue, it's like build a component, like an autocomplete or a star rating UI, which is where things like the JavaScript 30 come in handy. Like, as you're interviewing, just build small, dumb things so you're ready to do that. The other one is like building a CRUD app. So like specifically with full stack or backend positions, I would expect that you could test drive like basic CRUD operations on an API. Like that's a pretty common challenge. And so like this is stuff like to do MVC, the blog. And then another one is explain a solution to a hypothetical problem. This is easily the most frustrating one because it's super subjective. It's like, I don't like whiteboard. We don't do whiteboarding in our interview process other than like if you want to like explain a system with like some flowcharts, there's like a whiteboard available, but I think whiteboard coding is just dumb. But I mean, if you use that, it is dumb, so don't use that. But but if you're interviewing for a place like, again, I don't know if Google still does this, but like when I read through this, it's like part of their coding problem is like pseudocode on the whiteboard. So like if you want to work for a place and they're a really good company, like sometimes their interview process just has this. You need to be prepared for it. It's like part of the game. And again, read this book cover to cover, build dumb things, and you'll be fine. I've never been in an interview. So first of all, for your first couple of interviews, you're going to do a bad job, probably. I did. Like a lot of people do. This is just like, you don't go from like, I learned to play guitar on YouTube to I'm playing with Celine Dion in one set. Like, you just have to play, like you have to kind of you're going to have some interviews, you're going to have to kind of figure out how to do things. But as long as you're preparing, you'll get better every time. Yin Ying, one of my favorite interviewers, says, practice going through the problem and thinking out loud. Practice explaining what you're trying to do when you're coding, or explaining, then coding, which is actually a good skill. Esteban, who's another amazing interviewer, says, practice on things like HackerRank. Be ready to solve an algorithm problem, know the difference, know how to explain the efficiency of what you're doing. Which, if you want to know how to do that, read the Green Book. For me, have your IDE and programming environment ready. If you say you do Ember, you better have Ember CLI installed and be ready to go. If you say you do React, have Create React App installed and ready to go. We usually try to have like bootstrapped environments ready, but there was a time when we didn't, and there's plenty of people who don't. So like if it's like, hey, I want to see you code something in React and you're not set up, you're burning like 20 minutes of your interview trying to figure out how to get something set up. And it just like, it looks bad. Even though it shouldn't be bad on you, it does look bad. And then questions, always have a physical list of questions you're wanting to ask the employer. Make a couple of them personal based on things you've read, and make a couple of them very general. There's usually some time when the interviewer goes, do you have any questions for me? On most of our more senior people, this is one of the biggest things that they look at when they interview people is what questions they ask back. Questions I usually ask, which I think are pretty good to write on your every time list that you can just have ready, is how do your engineers settle disagreements? What is your biggest concern going into the next quarter? This one's actually amazing. How likely are you to recommend that one of your friends works here? Because if they're if you go back to where I talked about where can you get the best job, is from your friend that you know likes their job. So that kind of helps you understand the culture. How does communication work here? Describe the company culture. This is pretty vague, but if people have dirty laundry to air, they're going to do it here, and you're going to know. You want to know this ahead of time. What's your favorite and least favorite thing about working here? How do you know you're doing a good job at work? Again, and then have some other ones, if you read that they just closed the big funding round, be how's closing the funding round changed your hiring process? What is the morale like after you just closed this massive Series B or something? Just be ready to talk about things that these people know about. You'll make a personal connection with them, and you'll seem like you're already on the team. And finally, if you use Sublime Text, buy a license before you interview with me. If you click save and the please buy Sublime pops up, it's just losing points for no reason. That's kind of personal preference, but. So again, the fearless interview. Review your dossier before every interview, that Evernote file that you have on this company that's you've done your research. Your local coding environment should be set up. You've solved hundreds of algorithm problems and done dozens of dummy components and apps, which just happens over time. You're networking constantly at meetups and conferences. You're regularly applying on job boards, listing sites, and through recruiters, and everything else you can think of. If you do these things, you can get a job at whatever company you want. So you're at the X. If you are somebody who has this fantasy job, I love my job, and I think that I'm there. I'm sure I'll think that about every job from here, but I just love what I do now. I work remotely. I've got 2 kids. My water cooler is having goldfish with my 3-year-old. I love Ember. That's I get to work with my favorite technology. I love my team. Help other people get there. There's a lot of people that are making less than they're capable of right now. Getting into a program, the technology industry can amplify their quality of life. It can help. It can be the difference between my family has enough to make it and not. So having programming jobs, if you have them, help bootstrap people to get into these jobs. I think that's part of our responsibility being in a good job, is helping other people get there. So share your journey. There are people looking like this at you, no matter what stage of the journey you're on. Encourage the future heroes. And that's where I will end. Also, if you have finished freeCodeCamp, I will happily interview you and tell you what I think, just to help get the jitters out. So message me on social media. If there's a flood of people, I will find other people to interview you. Don't worry about it. If this is your big stumbling block, we can fix that together. After 174 slides, I'm curious, does anybody have any questions?
Do you have any general advice on someone that has a good career already but hasn't really jumped to the tech side? I'm worried about pay loss, pay cuts, switching careers at my age.
Okay, so the question was, if you already have a job in a non-tech industry that's a pretty good job, any specific advice on people wanting to cut over to the tech career? I think there's basically 2 different trains of thought on this. One, you need to look at where you are now and where you're going to be in 10 years. And if you hopped over to tech and took a pay cut in 10 years, where will you be? I don't think that's a way to decide anything, but I think it helps answer some questions. Going back to some of the other advice I have, you bring something unique to the team. So like, can you tell me what field in general you're in right now, for example?
Supply chain management and kind of data analytics.
So if you are doing supply chain management stuff, there's likely tech opportunities in your field. So when you add, oh, and I can program onto your current title, it will likely give you a raise in the same industry. I've seen a lot of people do this where they essentially take their current job, they pivot it into tech stuff, and then they use that as like, hey, I've already had a tech job, and now I'm applying for another senior position. So it's a little bit of a longer path to the tech industry, but it is a way to like provide like kind of that like no loss in like financial wellness path. Does that make sense? What else?
Can you tell us a story about someone who interviewed with you that really knocked your socks off and why?
I'm trying to think. So, somebody who was a literal author interviewed with me recently, which is not like, there's nothing magic about being an author. Any one of us can go on LeanPub and publish like Feeding Dogs for Dummies and like we're an author, right? But like I was actually familiar with their work and we ended up solving some completely unrelated challenge. So it's weird because it's like the people who really impress me, it's very seldom about the actual interviewing. It's more about like the conversation around it. It's a bad answer. Let me think again. Interviewing is very hard. Not many people impress me. That's the honest truth. That's why I wrote this talk. Like people. So I'll tell you. Conversely, there have been people who have not impressed me in an interview who we've hired that have really impressed me in the job. That's probably a better answer. So it's like, I think that's really, we've worked a lot on our interviewing process to make it like, we want to capture that. Yeah. Next question. So I think like in the green book, the general rule of thumb is 6 months. I don't have personal experience with that. I think this is, so like especially with places like Google or Facebook, like it's pretty much accepted you're not gonna make it for the first pass. So like applying again at a place is not bad. The thing that I would tell you, if you apply again, you need to kind of have some like change to your story. So like, again, this is why I'm a big fan of side projects, or if you get another job that kind of helps like change, like I was here and now I'm here and I think I'm a much more compelling case to work with you, that type of thing. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this is where I go and look at their social media. This is like a big thing. Like I want to know who, like the people also, like, you know how I said the best jobs come from your friends? The best candidates also come from your friends. So I think number one is like if somebody is like I respect Bob and Bob has recommended Sally work here. Like going into that, usually Sally is going to be a better candidate than like Rando. So like any recommendations through relationships are usually very good. Specifically for people I feel like are gaming me. For us in particular, like I look at their, so if it's like a coding thing, I'll look at their personal GitHub and I actually will be like, I see you worked on this project, let's work on it together. Like when people game you, they tend to be very good at the interview. So you need to do something non-traditional to break up the interview process. So like when you open an issue on one of their repos and you're like, hey, for our interview, can you explain how this works to me? They're going to be expecting like the standard challenge. So like I think that's where you need to kind of like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I just was around those interviews and I could tell who's ready, who's flexible, whatever.
Are you able?
Questions still, they're pretty prepared.
Yeah. So are you able to do any research ahead of time into your candidates?
They're kids, like, so in this case, they're contractors and stuff. Maybe an hour to prepare for
Mm-hmm.
otherwise they're just not about it.
Yeah, if you are concerned at all, I think one really good thing you can do is, specifically if it's if you have any red flags, I always opt for like, can we contract for a while instead? That doesn't work for everybody, but it's a lot lower risk to bring on somebody as a contractor or a consultant and actually get to know like. Yep, and so I think also the thing like, if we have a specific technical recruiter and she's great, I think if she was here, probably one of the things she would say is like going through like, where are you sourcing these people from? Like, you should also talk with the people who you currently work with and be like, hey, is anybody that you know looking to make a change or looking to get into this? Because again, your best candidates will come from people that you know. So if you love working with somebody, you'll probably love working with their friends. Yep, and so the comment was like, you're not mic'd, are you? I'll repeat the comment then. The comment was like, in my experience, a slower, more thorough hiring process tends to yield higher quality candidates. I would say this is true also. Our hiring process is like at minimum 4 back-to-back 1 hour coding challenges, which I think is brutal. Like when I did that, I was like, this is insane. But I'll tell you that this team that I'm working on is some of the best software engineers I've ever worked with. So it's like probably true. Mm-hmm. Sure. So the question was, like, I'm a pretty private person. Is it a big turnoff for people trying to hire me if all of my social media is locked down? I highly like going back to if you want to work at Macro Corp, be like a Macro Corp. If you want to work at Startup Lee, you need to be like a startup person. I think that what I would do in your case, specifically with like Twitter, as you're learning things and reading articles and like, you need to treat Twitter more as like a knowledge share. So like if it's the case where you make a different Twitter that's not personal, you publish little today I learns and things, I think that's actually really important because it will help your employer know that you're engaging with the community. And so it's like, you don't have to like put like any personal stuff on there. Like, you know, I've got kids and I very seldom post kid pictures on Twitter ever. Even though they're adorable, there's like a lot of creepy people out there and I don't want to cross those paths. But I do think it's very important if you're trying to get a new job specifically, you have to have some community presence. And so I think about this a lot like if you have a house and if you have like the massive privacy fence around the house, every time somebody drives by, they're going to think it's a creepy family, creepy house, even though you could just be valuing your privacy. I think it's a matter of how you present yourself. So it's like, if you like have the nice yard and the nice face, but the privacy fence in the back, I think that's basically what you want. You have to have something that people can see so they can get to know you. I think that is pretty important, but you don't need to do it in a way that puts your family at risk at all. Okay. So the question was, what social media is best for the tech industry? Unequivocally, in my experience, that would be Twitter. It depends on the industry. Like, LinkedIn is very important for a lot of people, but like nobody I know uses it. Instagram is never important unless you're like trying to sell products or wanting people to know how cool you are. And Facebook tends to be the same. It's like usually highly personal stuff. So like, I don't know of any, like I'm friends with all of my coworkers on Twitter, but I'm not friends with any of my coworkers on Facebook, if that kind of explains. Any other questions? So how would I get started on Twitter? So if you go on my GitHub, there's 150 open repos. I open source literally everything. I did it because I was too cheap to pay, and it's turned out to be one of the biggest like recruitment ways that people try to recruit me. So people will literally do like automated searches through GitHub on what you star and what you have, and like use that to automate their recruiting process. Like open source as many things as you're comfortable with. Specifically, who runs the freeCodeCamp Twitter? There's probably some way they could help you get started too. If you like give a lightning talk, then they can promote it, and then I'll retweet it. Like it just kind of has to start like that. So like another big thing is conferences. If you go to conferences and meetups, try to follow people. They'll usually follow you back. So like I have 700 something followers, which has been only through, like I know most of them. So like you just have to go network like a madman or a mad person if we're, any other questions? Was this helpful at all? Okay, great. When I was like looking at this, I'm like, I feel like a little bit of false advertising since I called it the Fearless Interview, but I thought it was useful, or people are just going to hate it, so I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. Cool.